Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. My name is Caitlin Jones, and I am the coordinator of the Employment Readiness Program. And I am hoping that today we'll get to talk some about documentation, case noting, and confidentiality, as those are things that are all really central to our work and really support our clients. It doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes documentation feels tedious and difficult, but it does help us to do our work in a better way. So hopefully this is helpful in talking some more about the process. So first we'll talk a little bit about case file documentation generally. A few months back, somebody in one of our all staff meetings said something about how in all of the work that we do, we want to make it matter and do more than just checking it off and making sure that we have that form, which sometimes that's part of the process. But documentation really does do a lot to support the framework for our client services. It helps set expectations and lay out the framework for how you'll work together, and helps with follow-up in a lot of different ways. So it is important to think about how we can use the documents that we're required to use to support the work that we're doing. It really has its challenges. The amount of time that it takes to fill out forms or follow up on case notes can be a lot. They can be tedious and repetitive, filling out the same form in multiple intakes. And there are limitations to the forms and some of the documents that we use to that don't necessarily fit every instance, but there are still ways that we can use them to support clients, no matter what the circumstance can be. Does anyone want to talk or suggest some ideas about why documentation can be helpful?
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to suggest that documentation is really helpful for when we're applying for grants. Through Apricot, we can run a report on anything that's recorded in Apricot. And so a lot of grants want to know very specific information about how many people from this country did this type of thing, or how many people with this, native first language does had this aspect. And so it can be really helpful for grant writing.
I was also going to say, it's helpful to just, for other teams to know, what the client has been doing and where they're at in their case. And because the client works with many different programs, sometimes like the ERP program and then resettlement. So it's good to know where the client stands on certain tasks.
Definitely. Any other suggestions?
There's also sort of a liability piece of keeping track of the services provided and any, making sure that there's consistency in what we said we provided and how we followed up with clients.
Definitely.
Also, I guess just helpful to a case manager, because I forget when I do things or what I've done sometimes for in a particular client. Just thought I'd add that last thing in there.
Definitely. I think that those are all excellent examples. And I think all of those are on this list. The first thing and the most important thing is it demonstrates the work that you have done with clients. It outlines goals, progress, and provision of services. So it shows everything that you're doing for a lot of different reasons, but it represents all of those components of your work. Let's see, Donia, you said something about how it helps teams communicate. It supports internal communication between programs and service providers, which supports continuity of services. It's easy for things to get duplicated or somebody to be talking to multiple case managers about multiple or about the same thing, and so it can be helpful in those instances. It also provides a record of external communication with other organizations, providers, and services. So it helps when going back and saying, okay, what was that conversation that we had 2 weeks ago with the landlord or a while ago with the employer? That can be really helpful for that. It provides supervisors, funders, and other auditors information needed to evaluate and improve services. And that also speaks to some of what Dana was talking about with how it helps us with getting additional funding for our organization. It provides information when a staff transition occurs or if there's an emergency. There are certainly plenty of instances where things have come up and somebody is more effectively able to fill in or follow up because there's clear documentation of what happened before and what needs to happen next. It protects clients and staff. Wendy mentioned some of this, especially when there's a critical incident. We want to have clear documentation of those instances, and that they can even be used in legal proceedings. And then I guess we did mention this already, but it can be used to expand funding and improve services. So there are a lot of reasons that it matters and supports our work. So I have a couple of things that I have found to be helpful in case file documentation, just generally. And I think some of this comes with practice and getting to know the forms that you're generally working with. The first recommendation that I have is make the case file forms work for you and your clients, especially for forms that you do pretty regularly. If you work in a program that works on budgets with clients or create service plans and working for needs assessments, they sometimes can be a little frustrating or very tedious. And to talk with clients about how it's helpful. I've worked a lot with employment programs, which all require budgets. And some clients really say, I have a handle on my finances, I don't need this. And we still are required to do it as part of our work. But I can sit with clients and say, well, how can this be helpful to you? How can this help you to have a sense of where you're at financially? That way, rather than just saying, let's just check this box and get it done. And sometimes that will happen too, and that's okay. But there are instances where we can be more thoughtful about how it might be helpful in a different way, or that we can help clients to think about the form as being more useful than they might initially start out as thinking about it. Think about what forms need to be done now and what can be flexible. Intake meetings can be very long and have a lot of forms attached to them. And sometimes doing them all in one meeting can be really exhausting. So sometimes it's good to know what forms you might be able to say, we can move back to this a week later and follow up, just so that clients are able to have the benefit of really getting to hear and understand all of the contents of these forms. While it is a lot of paperwork, it's there for a reason, and we want clients to have the knowledge and information to be informed about their services at NSC. The next one, always be sure that clients understand what they're signing. There are plenty of places where clients will have forms put in front of them that they'll be asked to sign that they don't understand. And by giving them the time and effort to make sure that they know what they're signing, that helps them to know that they have that right, that they should be able to understand what they're signing and that they can advocate for themselves to ask more questions if that piece of paper is being put in front of them at the welfare office or at their child's school or anywhere else that they might have interactions where especially language limitations might prove a challenge in understanding. So while it is about helping make sure that clients understand what services and rights they have at NSC, it also helps them develop skills to advocate for themselves outside of NSC. So it's important for that reason as well. The next recommendation that I'll make around case file documentation is, especially if your case files are form heavy or you're required to have a lot of different documents in a case file, it can be really helpful to create a tracking system to stay on top of documentation. I've developed spreadsheets for my program and for other programs that I've worked in that list all of the things that we're required to have on the case file for all of the clients. And just use that as a checklist and a tracking mechanism for myself, so that if a client is coming in or I know I'm meeting with a client, I can pull that up quickly and see what I might need to fill in. And just not have to go through the case file page by page to figure that out, especially if it's somebody that I don't see as frequently. Another important tip, make sure that you don't white out or scribble out information in case file forms. That's something that most monitors do not or will ask you not to do. Instead, do a strike through if there's information that maybe you spelled something incorrectly or put a number in wrong, or a client said, oh, wait, that's not what I meant. Just draw a line through it so that auditors can see clearly what was written before, but recognize that there is some sort of error made. And then the last thing is, remember that documentation, doing it in a timely manner now helps when audits come, or when other staff transitions occur. It's easy to get behind on paperwork. We know that very, very well. But it is really beneficial to try to find ways to stay on top of it, because we can do it more effectively when it's not backed up to the last minute. So now we'll dig a little bit into case notes specifically. And one of the ways that it has helped me the most as a social worker in understanding case notes and what's important to include is this idea of case notes telling a client's story. I've heard that said by multiple auditors, and so that's one thing to know, that is what they're looking for when they're checking case notes. And it's helpful to have the idea that what you're trying to do is tell a continuous story from start to finish of where you started with the client, what the things were that you said you were going to work on, what the story of your relationship was, how you were working together, and then reaching the end. So really looking at it as this whole story rather than just the check boxes. Though those check boxes, if you have certain items that you have to document, those are important too. The NASW, or the National Association for Social Work, has some clear language around case recording and how we should use it. It says the social work case manager should document all case management activities in the appropriate client record in a timely manner. Social work documentation shall be recorded on paper or electronically and shall be prepared, completed, secured, maintained, and disclosed in accordance with regulatory, legislative, statutory, and employer requirements. And then some of the other things that it mentions is that case notes should be clear and concise, and provide documentation of services, because it is a foundation for service planning and practice. It shows us where we started and where we need to head, and how we need to follow up and supporting clients. So then specifically, outside of saying everything needs to be case noted, which to some extent is true, case notes should be both for direct services to clients, which are any in-person meetings, any phone calls with clients, any text messages, any emails, or mail sent to clients. But case notes should also include outside contact with service providers. So if you are working with another organization that you have a release signed on behalf of a client, then you would contact that service provider, for example, the welfare office, and say, I contacted the welfare office and let them know that the food stamps were turned off for the client and asked for further information. So you would include something like that in a case note. Also, if you're doing any applications or referrals, they should also be case noted. And then just a couple of general hints or helpful hints in case noting. Make sure that you stay on top of case notes. I know that that's difficult to find a way to do sometimes. Days can be really, really long with client meetings, and it can be hard to get to. But what in my, I think, 8 years practicing as a social worker, I've done my best work in case noting, and it's been the least burden when I stay on top of it. It's easy to let it wait a week, and then your case notes get a little sparser and have fewer details. So as much as you can, case note in a timely manner. NSC asks that you case note within 1 to 2 weeks of an interaction. There are a couple of programs that do have some specific requirements for how long you have to case note. So check with your supervisors and see if there are any specific requirements. Otherwise, generally NSC says case note should be written within 1 to 2 weeks. When you put a case note in Apricot, include your name at the end of your case note. So when I finish a case note, I will sign off CJ, and some of that has to do with how case note reports print off of Apricot. And even if somebody else edits your case note, it's sort of, it doesn't necessarily show who wrote a case note. Make sure that you're using any program-specific acronyms to refer to clients. This is specifically true, I know, for RNP and matching grant, but some other programs have some specific acronyms, like PA for principal applicant, or they might use HU or WI or SO for husband, wife, son. So just be aware of any requirements that your specific program may have. And then also make sure that you're writing case notes in the third person. So you would say case manager contacted client, or case manager sent the referral to highest. Just making sure that it's all on the third person. A couple things to avoid in case noting. These are a couple of different things that either could cause difficulty, in a couple of ways we're not mindful of. The first one is about writing another client's name in a case note who is not part of the case being served. Every program is a little different in how they define a case and who is part of the case. So that is something that you'll need to check in with your supervisors about. But there are at least a couple of programs at NSC where if you are mentioning another client who is not part of the case in the case note, it can be considered a violation of confidentiality, even if both clients are fine with being in the same room and being part of the same meeting. So the way that you would document that instead is you would say the client's friend, the client's roommate, the client's cousin, the client's grandmother, without specifically listing that specific client's name. I know this is particularly true in the RNP and matching grant programs, but again, check with your supervisors about any things that are specific about this. Another thing that we need to be mindful about how we document is medical diagnoses. We can always include general information saying that a client has a short-term or long-term health diagnosis, and any things that would be relevant specifically to the work. Specifically thinking about the employment programs might need information on a medical diagnosis if it would make it difficult for a client to work in a certain type of job. So that is the type of thing that you can document, but you wouldn't want to specifically say client has tuberculosis, or client has tested positive for any number of other things. So just limit it to saying they have a short-term or long-term diagnosis, depending on what the nature of the illness is.
I have a brief question about
Sure.
medical diagnoses. Is it okay to say client went for a COVID-19 test if that like impacts part of their service plan or work or something that we're directly supporting them with?
Really good question, Dana.
And then also like if somebody, I mean, this is very specific for employment, but
Totally.
if somebody is diagnosed with something, for example, COVID-19, and has to miss work for it, we had to do communication with the employer. Like, do you think that is okay to document, or would it still be better to stay vague and just say like client was diagnosed with an illness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And truthfully, I didn't think about that. What I'd like to do is just go back and talk with a couple of folks and get some guidance specifically around that. And
Okay.
I can follow up.
Okay.
Thanks for asking that.
Of course. Thanks.
I'm not sure, Gwen, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess the only other
Go
thing I can think of, but it's not specific, is maybe using a term like COVID-related issues or something like that, or pandemic-related issues. But I'm not really sure what you need it to say in order to match what you're doing. So yeah, Caitlin, I think it's a good idea to check in maybe with Gretchen about that.
So we'll get back to you. Thanks for asking that.
You know what? I'll email her right now and see if we can get an answer before we get off. Before we get off.
Sounds good.
Okay.
A couple of other things to avoid in case notes is including an abuser's name. That can be really difficult, especially if clients have any legal proceedings happening. We don't want to have that documented, especially because case notes can be subpoenaed and taken to court. So we want to be very mindful about that. For the same reason, we don't include any specific information about arrests, warrants, or interactions with ICE or police. If those things are happening, talk with your supervisor right away, and they can provide clear guidance on how you should document it, and what you should include and what you should not include. Avoid using slang, jargon, biased opinions, or judgment. There certainly can be some difficult situations that happen with clients, and it might be possible that you're thinking about a client situation, saying that a client is making a choice that you wouldn't agree with, or that might be difficult. But we want it to be just a picture of what happened, what was said, what was done. And we don't need to include opinions or judgment. There are other places for processing those things. But case notes, we want to just be describing what happened, what services are being provided. Another thing is when you're case noting, if you say that you're going to follow up providing a service, make sure that you do follow up and provide that service, because that's something that auditors are particularly mindful of, but also in terms of what our commitments are to clients. We want to make sure that if we're going to assist with something and we say we'll do it, that we're following through. And the last thing is just disclosing details from critical incidents in the same way that we talked about any information related to a domestic violence situation or any interactions with the police. Always talk with your supervisor if you're not quite sure about how to document something. So the things that we should include in case notes, if you can think of those W questions that you learn in elementary school: who is involved, what happened, where, why, when, and then follow up. That can be a helpful guide for you to think about what to include. For who, that's anyone who's involved in the interaction. So yourself, any interpretation should be included in every case note. which family members might have been present. So if your case is working with the whole family, you would include that in your case note. And any other involved parties. So there may be situations where you're working with a different organization and a client, and you would include that organization, whoever the representative might be, in the case note. For what, you can include what happened, what you found out, what you did, what you thought, and what is next. All of those things can be guiding questions in deciding what to include in a case note. You'll include where. Some of that is built into our apricot form. You'll say the mode of service, if it's in office, over the phone, text. That's where you can find that. Why did it happen is a that may be a little more difficult to discern or may not always be applicable. You might say you called the client since they had sent you a text the previous day. And then, of course, we include the date and the length of time and any follow-up that's required.
I have a question about that last thing.
Sure.
So what if, you know how on Apricot there's like, there's a drop down for the type of service provided or like how it was provided via phone, text, blah, blah, blah. I'm not always so clear which one to choose when I do something like for or with a client over the phone. Like sometimes I choose phone call and sometimes I choose service on behalf of client, but I'm not always sure like which, and I don't think I'm consistent. So I was wondering if you have about that.
So the guidance that I would suggest is that if you're with a client, then you're providing the service directly to the client. So the service on the behalf of a client would be anything that you're doing while the client is not present with you. So if you are submitting an application on their behalf, or if you're contacting a partner agency about a client on their behalf, or if you're having like a case coordination meeting on a client's behalf, that's where you would use that specific mode of service. So you would defer to a phone call if you're doing something while you're with them.
Caitlin, I got the response from Gretchen.
Oh, great.
Oh, okay. She said, she suggested using something like this: client received additional testing, diagnosis and needs will follow up with a specialist / service, etc. So it looks like still not putting in the diagnosis, but identifying that there was testing done and that any diagnosis, they would follow up with a specialist.
It's when.
I can write that in the chat box if you want.
Another useful tool for case noting can be the SOAP note acronym. This is pretty common in a lot of social service and even other programs that provide client-based services for describing what should be included in a case note. So SOAP stands for subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. So you can include all of those things in a case note when you're documenting. So subjective is a summary or exact statement by a client or any other pertinent party that contains information about the issue from the client's perspective or that of significant others. So those are the things that the client may say, this thing happened and you're not really sure what happened, but from their perspective, this is how they're seeing the situation. This is what they're bringing. Objective is any facts. Observations made by staff that are factual, quantifiable, and can be seen, heard, smelled, counted, or measured. This can be physical and general appearance, coherence, concentration, memory, speech, affect, behavior, strengths, mental status, and interpersonal information. The assessment is demonstrate how the subjective and objective data are being formulated, interpreted, and reflected upon. So your assessment of what's happening and a plan of what is going to happen next. So to break that down a little bit, I have a couple of examples. For subjective, would anybody like to read the example? Or I guess the two examples that are there?
No problem. So for subjective, client describes feeling very tired in the morning and not able to get out of bed until 11 a.m. after starting a new medication prescribed by his doctor. It is affecting his ability to work. He is also worried about not having income and reports great concern about losing housing and does not know what he is going to do. Note, if client refers to someone else's name, indicate that other person by initials to guard against any breaches in confidentiality in case they are referring to another client. Oh.
I'm sorry. I pulled that out of something else, and this is something different than the, I guess, 2 slides before.
Caitlin, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I was wondering if the medical diagnosis tip also applied to like providing like vaccine record information, for instance, like during the, like for pathways to permanency, we set up EHS appointments, and sometimes we ask clients if they received a certain vaccine. And I was wondering if like we're allowed to say like in a case note, client has received this vaccine, or client has had a history of chickenpox, for instance, so they don't need to receive this vaccine for the green card. I don't know.
I think it would, that's something that you can check in with Danielle about, but I assume that in that specific instance, because you're trying to ensure that all of these things are on file, that those would be things to document.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like breaching any sort of confidentiality. Thank you.
Next for objective, would somebody else read the objective example? Sure.
A client arrived 20 minutes late to our meeting and was slouched in his chair and had his head down. He later expressed interest in the topic we discussed.
So that's what the staff person is seeing and observing in the client meeting. Assessment, would somebody be able to read that?
I could read it. Example 1. Client needs support in dealing with scheduled appointments and taking responsibility for being on time to group. Example 2. Client needs a referral to mental health specialist for a mental health assessment. Example 3. Appears that client is having difficulty with new medication and the client is upset about possible loss of housing, and this might be having an effect on his health.
And then last, or the last is the plan. Would somebody be willing to read the example for the plan?
Okay, for plan, example 1, contacted support group near client's home and scheduled a follow-up meeting for January 30th, 2019 at 12 p.m. Example 2, discussed with client about talking to his doctor about how his current medication is affecting him and his ability to sleep and work. Staff provided emotional support regarding fear of losing housing and will contact Mary Smith, his landlord, to rule out other causes of eviction and explore possible payment options. Staff will also prepare a referral to a housing advocate to minimize disruption and explore other housing options. Client will gather proof of income to prepare for a housing meeting. Staff will update service plan with new housing goal. Staff will check in next Wednesday on February 10th, 2019.
Thanks, Julia. Okay. So hopefully that's a little helpful in getting an idea of a couple of things that you can add into a case note. And then here I have a couple of examples. I know we're doing a lot of reading in this little section, but soon we'll do a couple of practice case note scenarios. But I want you to get to see a couple of different case notes and what you might include from a client meeting. I wonder if somebody would be willing to jump in and read these two examples of in-office meetings.
Sure, no problem, Kayla. So financial assistance. Case manager met with client to review PPR's emergency rental assistance. Client brought the documents CM requested and completed the financial assistance form. CM explained to the client the terms of agreement and that financial assistance is not guaranteed. CM informed client that the form will be reviewed by the supervisor and the CM will let the client know in 1 to 2 weeks of the result via phone. CM will review the form with supervisor. And critical incident. Client came in without an appointment to meet with case manager. Client described of chest pain beginning at 9 a.m., but did not want to go to the emergency room. Partway through English class, client complained of increasing chest pain radiating down her left arm and began vomiting. CM and client agreed that client would go to the emergency room in an ambulance, accompanied by a member of NSC staff, Molly. Another supportive staff from the health team, Penny, called 911 to request an ambulance. Since client stated that she did not think she could walk to ER. Client was discharged the next day from Jefferson Hospital, and CM scheduled a follow-up meeting with the client on 12/15/2018 and debriefed with supervisor. A critical incident report was completed and submitted to Helen on 12/10/2018. For additional information, please see critical incident report.
So much, Colin.
Caitlin, can I just add one quick thing here? Because I know you weren't aware of this. We actually created a sort of like a standardized critical incident case note template that I'll send out when I send this recording out. That was just a more recent update so that we can have a bit more consistency in how we all report that.
Thanks, Gwen. Next, I wonder if somebody would read the case notes on this slide, which talk about how we can do walk-ins and phone calls that happen.
Okay, so for walk-ins, client walked in, reason for walk-in, and then staff, intern, or volunteer met with the client and used LL number or name, the in-person or telephonic interpreter, and completed the general walk-in form. Staff, intern, or volunteer was able to determine why and what the client needed help with. Staff, intern, and volunteer explained to the client the next steps and then follow-up time frame. And then staff and intern and volunteer completed the action plans and then informed appropriate staff.
I'll just jump in and say that's like the format that you could use. So if you're thinking about how you can fill in some details for a case note, you might consider using a template like that. I have another template, a page of templates from a previous training that we can also send out after this for you to use in the future if it's helpful.
Okay. And then client walked in asking for her previous case manager, Dolly, from FSP program, who is no longer with NSC. FSP intern met with the client and used LL number 888895 and completed the general walk-in form. Intern was able to determine that the client needed assistance in applying for health insurance through the marketplace. Intern explained to the client that she would make a referral to the health team for she is unfamiliar with the exact dates of enrollment and they will be reaching out to her to provide additional information in 1 to 2 weeks. intern completed the health referral form and gave it to health core member Kamara. Do you want me to continue doing phone call? Okay. For phone call, an example would be case manager returned client's VM to explain the document he received from the welfare office. Case manager scheduled a meeting for client on 4/25/19 at 12 p.m. to help client complete and submit the application. Another example would be client called to let case manager know that he is unable to come into the office today to receive his check, but can come in tomorrow. Case manager informed client that he can stop by tomorrow anytime between 9 to 5. Another example is a case manager called the Welcoming Center to inquire on behalf of client who needed her university degree from abroad certified and evaluated. Welcoming Center staff explained the cost and referral process and answered additional questions. Case manager will text the client with updated information.
So I think what we're going to do now is I want us all to have a couple of practice opportunities to hear a scenario and then write a case note for what you think should be included. So what I'm going to ask is if somebody would be willing to assist me, and what I'm going to do is pull up the scenario. Let's see. And I'm wondering if I have two volunteers who might be willing to read this scenario with me, since there's 3 people in this first scenario.
I can read to a person.
Can everybody see the scenario? No. So Isabel, would you be the case manager?
Sure.
Would somebody like
to person or?
I can do Joshua if you want. Sure.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joshua.
Okay.
I can be Leslie. Does that sound all right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we're going to read through this, and then after we read through this, what I'll do is ask each of you if you want to type something up. You can do that in your own notes, but if you feel comfortable to share that in the chat too, it'd be great to hear some of your feedback on that. Okay. So Isabel, do you want to start us off?
Okay, Joshua, I'll follow up with PHMC Care Clinic and see why you received the bill. Before you go, let me make sure I have a release on file. That's fine. I have what I need and we'll follow up with you after I get in touch with them.
Great, thank you.
Hello. Oh, sorry. That's not me.
We need a 4th person.
Hello, this is PHMC Care Clinic. How may I assist you?
Hi, I'm calling regarding a bill my client received recently. Can you connect me with somebody who can help?
Sure, I'll transfer you to Leslie.
Hello, this is Leslie.
Hi, Leslie. I'd like to inquire about a bill my client received.
Sure. Do you have his patient ID?
Yes, it is 123456, and he received a bill on January 12th in the amount of $560, but paid his remaining balance of $10 in December.
Let me pull that up. It looks like he paid for his copay for his annual physical, and the $560 was for a procedure he did back in July.
That procedure should have been covered by his insurance. Can you verify that you have his correct insurance information?
I don't have his insurance information on file. That might be the issue. Can you provide me with that info?
Sure. He has IBX Keystone Health Plan East, and his ID number is 1234567
Thank you. We'll submit the info and update his file. This will most likely change his remaining bill. Feel free to have you or Joshua call us back to verify the updated information.
Great. Thank you. I'll call back in a week.
Thank you, everyone. So if you just take a minute and write down what you think you should write in a case note for this interaction. scroll up so you can see it all a little better. Everybody get to write a note. Would anybody be willing to share either in the chat or reading it, what their case note, what they wrote for their case note?
I'll be done in like one more minute, and I can share mine in a sec. Okay, so far, this is what I have. Case manager called client to let them know they will follow up with PHMC Care Clinic to see why the client received the bill. Case manager found out that the client paid for their copay for their annual physical, but the procedure should have been covered by their insurance. Oh wait, I messed up. So case manager called PHMC Care Clinic and found out that they paid for their copay for their annual physical, but the procedure should have been covered by their insurance. Case manager will be calling PHMC Care Clinic back in a week to verify the updated information. I think, yep.
Is there anything else that we could include in that case note? One thing that we might think of including is the person that we spoke with. So we know we spoke with Leslie. It can be helpful to track that, especially if any of you have dealt with insurance. It can be helpful to say, I spoke with Leslie on this date. So you might include that in your case note. That was great, Dania.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to try another one of these. This has 3 people in it. I wonder if there are any 3 folks who'd be willing to volunteer to be Malika, Anna, Claudia.
I can do Malika.
Great.
Maybe Claudia.
Sure. And I can do Anna.
Thanks, Tina.
Okay, calls the front desk. Hi, Anna. Do you know if Claudia is in the lobby?
I see someone here. Do you want me to ask?
That's okay. I'll head out. I walk to the lobby. Hi, Claudia. Good to see you. Are you ready to head over to USCIS together?
Yes.
Great. Your case manager told me you might need a SEPTA pass. Before you leave, would you mind signing here to confirm your receipt? And then, okay. And then I provide you with a SEPTA pass. Do you have your ID and biometric appointment notice with you?
Yes. Here you go.
Great. And we walk out together to USCIS. We arrive at USCIS and we get her fingerprints done. And as we walk out of the appointment, Claudia hands me papers.
I have these papers that my daughter received from her school. What is this?
I'm not quite sure what it's pertaining to. It looks like it might be results from a test your daughter took in school. Would it be okay if I showed your case manager and have her call you since she's more familiar?
Yes, please give it to her and have her call me.
Will do.
Thank you. So now I'll ask you to take about 2 minutes and write a case note for how you would case note this interaction. Okay. Would anybody be willing to share what they wrote as their sample case note for this scenario?
Sure, I can share mine. I wrote, intern met client in NSC lobby and escorted client to USCIS biometrics appointment via SEPTA. Prior to leaving NSC, intern had client sign confirmation of receipt of SEPTA pass and saved sign confirmation to client's file. Client completed biometrics appointment at USCIS. While leaving USCIS, client showed intern some papers from her daughter's school and asked intern the meaning of these papers. Intern suggested discussing these papers with case manager, and client agreed to allow intern to share these documents with case manager for a callback.
Right. Does anyone have anything different or different that they want to share in their case note?
Uh, yeah, you could also include like a follow-up to make sure that the CM calls the client.
Yeah, definitely the case manager can write that follow-up case note. And we'll do the follow-up contact. Thank you. That's a great note as well. Thanks, Olivia. Does anyone have any, so we got to do a couple of those examples. I'm wondering, does anyone have any questions about case notes that we haven't gotten to talk about? Okay. Then I just want to spend a few more minutes talking a little bit about confidentiality. It's something that hopefully all of you have some familiarity with it, as it is one of the documents that you sign one of the first days that you work at NSC. But it is a really important component of our work. One of the stories that I wanted to share with you about confidentiality is I once worked with a client who came back to me and shared a concern about an interpreter that they had worked with that they ran into at a social setting. And this wasn't, fortunately, it wasn't one of the interpreters with NSC. It was a different organization that had been contracted for interpretation. This client had run into an interpreter that they had worked with related to their services at NSC. And they ran into this interpreter at a party, and the interpreter mentioned, "Oh, I know you from NSC," and introduced the interpreter introduced their family and disclosed some of the reasons that they had been working with this client. And the client was very upset with this, and they said, "I thought my services at NSC were confidential. I had understood that no one else would know that I was receiving services while I'm here." We were able to go through a grievance procedure with that client and with the agency that had been contracted for interpretation. But it was just a really good reminder that confidentiality is about our client's dignity and respect. And that it can, and while our relationships may be really meaningful with our clients, it can also be difficult to talk outside of NSC about services that someone is receiving. There can be a lot attached to it. There can be shame, sometimes related to a lot of stigma related to participation in social services. So we really want to be respectful and mindful of clients when we consider confidentiality and how we interact with them in the office, how we talk about them around the office, and how we might interact with them if we encounter them outside of the office. So the first thing that I want to just go over is what our commitment is to clients. And this is what we have specifically written in the confidentiality agreement that all of the clients sign when they come to participate in services at NSC. So this should be sort of the groundwork for our understanding about how we practice confidentiality with our clients, as this is the agreement and commitment that we make to them. So the first thing is information is only requested from clients.
Caitlin, it doesn't actually look like it's on the screen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is it there now?
Yep.
Thank you. So the first thing is information is only requested from clients when it's essential for the purposes of assessment and service provision. So there may be things that we're curious about our clients' lives. But at the same time, we want to remember we are here for a specific purpose. We want to be mindful that the information that we're asking for in services is just related to how we are directly supporting them. So especially if clients are bringing up things related to personal conflicts or major decisions that they're making about their life that's not relevant to services. We want to be mindful of what is inside of our scope of services and what is outside of our services. The next thing is information may be shared within NSC for the purpose of coordination of care and quality assurance. And this allows us to have spaces like peer supervision and our case coordination meetings so that we can serve our clients in a better way. This is helpful to us as a whole organization as we're directly looking to serve them. Information may be shared cross-organization if it's relevant and necessary to services that are being sought. And if there's a need to disclose personal and private information, then a release of information should be signed. So that is also an important reminder that if you are coordinating with another agency for services, we should have documentation that we have clients' permission to be reaching out to them and communicating with them. If a social security number is provided for provision of services, we request special permission. There are a couple of programs that require this documentation. I know that's specifically true in employment services. And that's the reason that there's usually signature related to having social security numbers on file and using them. Next, in cases of legal proceedings, confidentiality will be protected to the extent that the law permits. Clients should be aware that any information related to case management services can be subpoenaed in a court case. In this case, NSC will seek to protect client information to the extent possible. And this is just a good reminder of the reasons that we do have some things that we are very careful about in how we document, because we are protected to a certain extent, but our documentation can be subpoenaed. So keep in mind as you're documenting, and we want clients to know that there are some instances where their information could be requested. If at any time a client provides information regarding serious, foreseeable, or imminent harm to either themselves or another person, confidentiality does not apply. In these cases, information may be disclosed in order to prevent serious, foreseeable, and imminent harm to the client or to another person. It's really important for clients to know and understand this because there certainly can be instances where a client may express thoughts of harm to themselves or to others, and they might say, but don't tell anyone. And this can be a tool for you if you're in this situation with a client, where you can say, it's important for you to know that we want you to be okay. We want you to be well. And it's good to develop some good language around how you might explain this to a client so that if this situation comes up, you can help them feel cared for, even when you might be navigating the challenging topic of discussing what next steps are if somebody is thinking about self-harm or of harming someone else. And we want clients to know that clearly up front so that it isn't a surprise if it does come up. In the same way, if we suspect any physical or sexual abuse or neglect to a child, so that's something that we also have to report. And it's also important for clients to be aware of that. Another thing is that while NSC will request that participants in group activities respect the privacy of all group members and hold confidential information that is disclosed, NSC is not able to guarantee that that will be honored. That would be particularly true for any groups that meet that may happen in English class or in job club, any places where clients are together or over in FSP with the groups. We want clients to be respecting one another and their confidentiality, but at the same time, we cannot hold them to the same standard that we ourselves are held to. And then the last pieces are about how we manage documentation. It's kept confidentially and stored securely. And we keep documents on file and case files for 7 years. Though there sometimes can be some discrepancies for services that have different requirements for keeping documents. And then the last thing is clients always have the right to participate in a grievance procedure when information is not held confidentially. So that's what we are committing to our clients, and we want to be really mindful of what that looks like in practice as we operate in the office and sometimes encounter our clients in outside places. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. I think one of the best rule of thumbs that I have heard is if you encounter a client outside of NSC, always follow the client's lead in greeting and conversation. So if you see a client and they greet you and say hello, it's usually fine to greet them and say hello. If they engage you in conversation and you're open to engaging with them in conversation, that's something that you can do. But if you see someone outside of NSC and they don't greet you, you need to move ahead like they're not somebody that you know, and respect their space and their privacy in that way. So always follow a client's lead if you are encountering them outside of NSC. Another thing that's really important is when you're even around NSC in the building, this is much less difficult during this time. But if you're thinking of when we're in the office, if you're discussing client information in the building, be mindful of where you are. Hallways are not necessarily private, as clients might be coming in and out of meetings. And certainly lobby spaces are definitely not private. So just be mindful of how that information is shared. Also be mindful of how you're keeping documents out in your spaces. And it's even important in your homes to be mindful of this. Sorry, I did make a note of this in this slide. As we are all of us working from home and share spaces with other classmates or family or friends, we still want to make sure that our clients' information is kept private and just to NSC staff. So make sure that information is secure. If you have case files, make sure they're closed up if you're not sitting near them. And that any personally identifying information is kept private as well. And that's true in the office too, especially if you're working in shared offices or open spaces, not to be leaving case files out where anybody can walk by and see documentation. Or if you're having clients even come into your office, being mindful of what other client information might be on your desk that is not pertaining to the person that you're meeting. And then the last thing is when you're sending emails about clients, be careful not to disclose information related to mental health or other critical incidents. And that follows the same rule of just being mindful about what could be subpoenaed in court. We want to make sure that clients' information is protected, and when things are written, they can be requested and used in different ways. So we want to be mindful of that. And if you're ever not sure, you can always talk with your supervisor about how to document certain situations. I wanted to take a minute to think about how we can talk with clients about confidentiality, just because my experience has been with some clients, confidentiality can be very specific to the United States. It's not necessarily a universal idea. And having ways to help clients to relate to different ideas can be helpful, especially if you're using this form and navigating it. I wonder if anyone has any things that have been helpful for them as they've gone through and explained the confidentiality form, or anything that's been helpful for them when different confidentiality questions have come up.
Well, I was just going to say, like one time a client did ask me on the phone, like, will all of my documents like be safe, like when you send them to the case aid? And I said, of course, we try to maintain confidentiality at all times, and I will make sure that it will be confidential, as all of everything that goes on between us is confidential. Um, and he was really appreciative of that. Like that reaffirmation of confidentiality, because a lot of our clients do like want to make sure. There are some clients more than others that really want to make sure that their documents are confidential, and it's yeah, and I'm really happy to explain that everything will be confidential, and I make sure it is.
That's great. Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. It's also helpful to just let them know that how you're keeping things confidential, because I told the client that when I do send the info documents to the case aid, I will encrypt the email, which puts a password protected thing on it, and so that means that everything in that email will not be able. No one else can read it other than the person who receives that email. And they said, okay, so that really does help to explain like how everything is kept confidential too.
One other thing that I think can be helpful sometimes is giving some clients examples, just as you think about how do we help clients understand what they're signing and understand what their rights are. It can be helpful to give an example to a client of what this might look like in a very practical way. So you might say, one of the things that I often say to clients when I'm talking about confidentiality is I'll explain to them, if I see you outside of the office and you want to greet me, I will always greet you. But if you see me outside of the office and you don't greet me, I'm not going to greet you because I want you to have the privacy to make the choice about whether you want to have a conversation. So sometimes giving examples like that can be really helpful for clients in being able to better frame how this works and why this might exist. And still some clients might say, but I always want to see you, and that's fine, and that's wonderful. But giving some examples can be helpful. Another example that I give to clients most of the time when I'm going over this form is I might say something like, if you're in the point that talks about if they're in a group with other clients, we can't guarantee confidentiality. I'll say, if you're in English class and you tell the class some personal things about yourself, while we hope that other people will keep it private, we can't guarantee it. And so sometimes giving examples like that can help clients to better picture and imagine how that might work. So those are some things that I found helpful in these examples. Does anyone have any questions about confidentiality or any things that have come up that they weren't sure how to navigate?
Just a quick question about case noting. If so, we should always make sure that we include the name of, for instance, like the intern or the case manager, the case aide, or anyone who is involved, like within NSC. Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I actually have not been doing that. I've been saying like case manager, but I wouldn't say the name of the case manager. So I will, and I'll do that from now on.
Any questions?
Oh, wait, last question.
Sure.
Sorry. So I wanted to ask about abbreviations too. Like, for instance, I know that jargon and other slang words and whatnot are not, you should not include those in case notes. However, like for instance, can you just include APPT for appointments, those little things? It's okay, right? Abbreviation.
Yeah, usually abbreviations are fine, especially if they're very common sorts of abbreviations. Um,
Thank you.
I know that we use a couple of acronyms in our case notes, and I know different programs do have lists of acronyms that they regularly use. Like I think BPW is something that's very common to use in case notes, or we use LL for language line, but also sometimes for landlord. So those things that are fairly common.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that's just about everything for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and being part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thanks.